Ma'am, I've told you twice. Identify yourself. You're being suspicious.
I'm walking my dog on a public street. That is not a crime.
Failure to ID is obstruction. Turn around. Hands behind your back now.
You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights and you're...
The woman was Judge Evelyn Haynes. At 54 years old, Evelyn was a pillar of the legal community. She was known among her peers for an intellect that was as sharp as a scalpel and a demeanor that could silence a chaotic courtroom with a single stern look over her reading glasses. She had prosecuted high-profile homicides in her 30s, moved to corporate defense in her 40s, and now in her 50s, she presided over family court with a firm but compassionate hand. She was the kind of woman who woke up at 5:00 a.m. to read case briefs before her morning coffee. She was precise, she was dignified, and she was currently enjoying her day off. That morning, Evelyn was dressed in a simple navy tracksuit and running shoes, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. In her left hand, she held the leather leash of Bruno, her 7-year-old German Shepherd. Bruno was a retired police dog she had adopted 3 years prior, a gentle giant who moved with the same disciplined grace as his owner. They had walked this specific route every morning for 10 years. The neighbors knew them. The mail carriers knew them. The landscape crews waved when they passed. It was a routine etched into the fabric of Evelyn's life, a moment of peace before the heavy emotional toll of hearing custody battles and domestic violence cases. But Officer Tyler Vance didn't know any of that. He didn't see a judge. He didn't see a neighbor. He saw a black woman in a tracksuit walking slowly through an affluent neighborhood at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning looking at houses. In his mind, she wasn't admiring the architecture or checking to see if the rhododendrons were blooming. She was casing the joint. Vance was 28 years old and had been with the department for barely 18 months. He had transferred from a smaller rural agency where he had acquired a reputation for high arrest numbers, a metric he was proud of, even if his previous supervisors found his methods overly aggressive. He was looking to make a name for himself in the city. He wanted good collars, the kind that led to felony charges and commendations. As he adjusted his utility belt and began his approach, he wasn't thinking about the Fourth Amendment or the concept of reasonable suspicion. He was thinking that he had spotted something out of place. Before we continue with this harrowing encounter, I need you to take a second and check something for me, the narrator's voice would later say over the viral breakdown of this footage. Are you subscribed? Stories like this happen every day, and we are dedicated to exposing the truth. Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Do you think officers should be required to articulate a crime before stopping a citizen? Let's get back to the scene. Evelyn heard the heavy boots on the pavement behind her before she heard the voice. She didn't turn immediately. She assumed it was a delivery driver or perhaps a landscaper. It wasn't until the voice cut through the morning air, sharp and commanding, that she stopped. "Hey, hold up a second." Evelyn paused and commanded Bruno to sit. The dog complied instantly, his ears perking up, but his body relaxed. Evelyn turned slowly. She saw the uniform first, the crisp blue shirt, the polished badge reflecting the morning sun, the hand resting casually but intentionally near the holster. She looked at the face above the uniform. Young, tight-jawed, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. She knew the type. She had seen dozens of officers like him testify in her courtroom, young men who mistook intimidation for authority. "Can I help you, officer?" Evelyn asked. Her voice was calm, the same leveled tone she used when overruling an objection. Vance stopped about 6 feet away. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a greeting. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on the dog, then back to her face. "You live around here?" Vance asked. It wasn't a polite inquiry. It was a challenge. Evelyn felt the familiar prickle of irritation, a heat rising at the base of her neck. She had lived in the corner house on Elm Street for a decade. Her mortgage was paid off. Her property taxes helped pay this officer's salary. "I do," Evelyn replied. She didn't elaborate. She didn't offer her address. She didn't owe him that. Not yet. Vance shifted his weight. He didn't like the brevity of her answer. He was used to people scrambling to explain themselves, nervous energy radiating off them when a cop approached. This woman wasn't nervous. She stood with a posture that was almost regal, looking down her nose at him despite being shorter. "We've had some reports of break-ins in this area recently." Vance lied. There had been no reports. Just checking on people who don't look familiar. "What's your address?" Evelyn tightened her grip on the leash, not out of fear, but out of resolve. "Officer, I am walking my dog on a public street in broad daylight. Unless you are accusing me of a specific crime, I am not obligated to provide you with my personal information." The silence that followed Evelyn's statement was heavy, filled only by the distant hum of a lawnmower and the chirping of birds. Officer Tyler Vance's jaw tightened visibly. In his 18 months on the force and his 2 years prior in the rural county, he had rarely encountered resistance. Compliance was the currency of the street, and he expected to be paid in full. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave, losing the pretense of a casual inquiry and taking on the hard edge of a command. "Ma'am, I'm conducting an investigation into suspicious activity. That requires you to identify yourself. Failure to do so can be considered obstruction." Evelyn almost laughed, but she held it back. The legal inaccuracy of his statement was staggering. She had written opinions on Terry vs. Ohio. She had dismissed cases where officers had manufactured suspicion out of thin air. "Walking while black is not suspicious activity, officer." Evelyn set her voice, remaining terrifyingly level. "And Brown v. Texas clearly establishes that you cannot stop and demand identification from a citizen without specific objective facts indicating that they are involved in criminal activity. You have no such facts. You have a woman walking a dog." Vance stepped closer. This was his tactic: invade the personal space, escalate the pressure until the subject cracked. "I don't need a law lecture. I need to see ID. Now. You're looking into driveways. You're moving slow in a high-theft area that's suspicious. Now, are you going to cooperate, or are we going to have a problem?" "The only problem here," Evelyn said, "is that you are currently violating my Fourth Amendment rights. I am not casing houses. I am looking at my neighbor's gardens because I am a gardener. I am walking slowly because my dog is 7 years old and has hip dysplasia. Those are innocent behaviors that you have chosen to interpret through a lens of bias." Vance's hand moved to his radio. He clicked the mic. "Dispatch, show me out with a suspicious female subject, elm and maple. Subject is non-compliant." Evelyn watched him, her mind racing through the procedural chessboard. She knew exactly where this was going. She could give him her ID. She could pull out the wallet tucked in her waistband, show him her driver's license, and likely her judicial credentials, which were right behind it. That would end it. He would see Honorable Evelyn Haynes. He would turn pale. He would stammer an apology, and she would walk away. But Evelyn Haynes was not just a judge. She was a woman of principle. If she showed her badge now, she would be saving herself, but she would be validating his behavior. She would be teaching him that he was right to stop her and that only her status saved her. What about the nurse walking home from a shift? What about the student? What about the people who didn't have a badge to shield them? "I am not a subject," Evelyn stated firmly. "I am a citizen, and I'm asking you again, what is the specific articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime?" "I told you," Vance snapped, his patience evaporating. "Loitering, prowling. Now let's see the ID." Across the street, the front door of a white colonial house opened. Martha Higgins, a 62-year-old retired schoolteacher, stepped onto her porch. Martha had lived across from Evelyn for 8 years. They exchanged Christmas cards. They complained about the homeowners association fees together. Martha held her phone in her hand, the camera app already open. She had seen the cruiser pull up. She had seen the aggressive posture of the officer. She knew Evelyn, and she knew something was wrong. "Is everything okay, Evelyn?" Martha called out, her voice projecting clearly across the lawn. Vance whipped his head around. "Ma'am, go back inside. This is police business." "I'm on my own property, officer," Martha yelled back, showing a spine of steel that decades of managing middle schoolers had forged. "And I'm recording that is Judge Haynes you are harassing." Vance froze. The words Judge Haynes hung in the air for a split second, but his brain flooded with adrenaline and the tunnel vision of a confrontation rejected the information. Judge. This woman in a tracksuit. Impossible. The neighbor was lying or she was confused. He was too deep in now. If he backed down because a neighbor yelled at him, he'd look weak. He'd lose control of the scene. He turned back to Evelyn, his face flushing red. "I don't care who you are. You're refusing a lawful order." "It is not a lawful order," Evelyn corrected him, her eyes locking onto his mirrored sunglasses. "It is an unlawful detention, and if you touch me, you will be facing a federal civil rights lawsuit that will end your career. Do you understand me?" Vance's ego couldn't take it. The neighbor recording the woman lecturing him the challenge to his authority. He made the decision that would ruin his life. "Turn around," Vance barked. "Hands behind your back." "For what?" Evelyn demanded, not moving. "Failure to identify. Resisting an officer. Turn around now." "Turn around." Evelyn looked at him with a mixture of pity and fury. "I am going to comply because I do not want to be shot. But you are making a mistake that you cannot undo." She dropped the leash. "Bruno, stay," she commanded softly. The dog whined but remained seated, his training overriding his instinct to protect. Vance grabbed Evelyn's wrist. He wasn't gentle. He wrenched her arm behind her back with excessive force, twisting the shoulder. Evelyn winced but didn't cry out. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked onto her left wrist, then her right. "You're hurting her," Martha screamed from the porch running down her driveway, now phone held high. "She has arthritis. Stop it. Back up." Vance shouted at Martha, one hand on Evelyn's arm, the other pointing a finger at the older white woman. "Back up or you're next." The scene on the corner of Elm and Maple had transformed from a quiet suburban morning into a spectacle. A landscaping crew 2 houses down had turned off their leaf blowers and were watching in stunned silence. A delivery truck had slowed to a crawl, and in the center of it all, Officer Tyler Vance was tightening handcuffs on a woman who had signed search warrants for his precinct less than 48 hours ago. Evelyn stood straight, despite the pain in her shoulders. The metal cuffs were biting into her skin. Vance had applied them too tightly, a petty, punitive measure common among officers who felt disrespected. "Officer," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "my dog. You cannot leave him here." Vance looked down at the German Shepherd. Bruno was vibrating with anxiety, a low growl forming in his throat as he watched his owner being restrained. "I'll call animal control," Vance muttered, reaching for his radio. "You will not—" Martha's voice cut in. She had stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, respecting the physical boundary, but pushing the verbal one. "I will take him. That is Bruno. I know him." Vance glared at Martha. "Do not interfere, lady." "I am not interfering," Martha snapped. "I am preventing you from traumatizing a service animal. Evelyn, do you want me to take Bruno?" "Yes, Martha, please," Evelyn said, looking at her neighbor. "Take him to your house. Call my husband. Tell him I'm being taken to the North Precinct." Vance scoffed. "You don't know where you're going." "I know exactly where I'm going," Evelyn said, her eyes shifting back to Vance. "I know the jurisdiction. I know the processing procedures. And I know that Sergeant Frank Miller is the watch commander on duty this morning. I suggest you radio ahead and tell him you're bringing in a prisoner." Vance paused. He actually did know Sergeant Miller was on duty. How did she know that? A flicker of doubt sparked in his chest, but he smothered it. She probably had a rap sheet, knew the cops from being arrested before. That explained the legal jargon. Criminals were getting smarter, he told himself. They watched TV. They learned the words. "Grab the dog," Vance spat at Martha. "But stay away from the vehicle." Martha stepped forward cautiously. "Come here, Bruno. Come on, boy." The dog hesitated, looking at Evelyn. Evelyn nodded. "Go, Bruno. Go with Martha." The dog slumped his tail between his legs and allowed Martha to take the leash. Vance grabbed Evelyn's arm and marched her toward the cruiser. He didn't use the proper escort technique. He shoved her slightly. He opened the back door and pushed her inside. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving. The interior smelled of stale sweat and industrial cleaner. As the door slammed shut, sealing her inside the cage, Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment. She wasn't afraid. She was beyond fear. She was in a place of cold, calculating fury. She began to catalog everything. The time, 10:42 a.m. The temperature, approximately 72 degrees. The officer's name tag, T. Vance. The force used, excessive. The legal basis, non-existent. Vance got into the driver's seat. He was breathing hard, the adrenaline dump making his hands shake slightly. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring right back at him, her expression unreadable. "You really think you're smart, don't you?" Vance taunted as he put the car in gear. "Refusing to ID. Making a scene. Now you got a record." Evelyn didn't respond to the taunt. She simply asked, "Are your body camera and dash camera active and recording?" "Yeah, they're recording," Vance said, pulling away from the curb. "Recording you acting like a lunatic." "Good," Evelyn said. "Do not turn them off. Not for a second." The ride to the station took 15 minutes. Vance played loud rock music on the radio, a petty attempt to make her uncomfortable. Evelyn sat in silence, meditating. She thought about the countless defendants who had stood before her claiming police misconduct. She thought about how often she had given officers the benefit of the doubt, assuming that in the heat of the moment they had acted reasonably. She realized with a sinking feeling in her gut that she might have been wrong more often than she cared to admit. They pulled into the sally port of the North Precinct. The heavy metal garage door rolled down behind them, sealing out the sunlight. Vance parked the car and killed the engine. "Let's go," he said, opening the back door. He hauled her out. Evelyn's legs were stiff. Her shoulders ached. He walked her through the secure hallway past the holding cells and into the processing area. It was a large room with fluorescent lighting, linoleum floors, and a high booking desk. Behind the desk sat Sergeant Frank Miller. Frank was 58, a 30-year veteran of the force. He had gray hair, a thick mustache, and a weariness that came from 3 decades of seeing the worst of humanity. He was looking down at paperwork when the door opened. "Got a refusal to ID resisting and obstruction," Vance announced proudly, pushing Evelyn forward. "Subject was casing houses in Oak Creek." Frank didn't look up immediately. "Oak Creek. We don't usually get prowlers up there this time of day. Did you get a name?" "Refused," Vance said. "Claimed she didn't have to." Frank sighed. He hated these kinds of arrests. Usually a waste of paperwork. He looked up, adjusting his glasses, prepared to give the subject the standard speech about cooperation. His eyes landed on the woman in handcuffs. For a moment, Frank's brain simply stopped working. He blinked. He looked at the face. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked at Vance, who was grinning like a hunter with a prize buck. Then he looked back at the woman. He knew that face. He had spent hundreds of hours looking at that face from the witness stand. He had signed warrants in front of her. He had seen her destroy defense attorneys with a single question. Frank stood up so fast his chair flew backward and hit the wall with a loud crack. "Holy!" Frank started, but cut himself off. His face went pale, then red. He came around the desk moving faster than he had in years. "Vance," Frank said, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. "What did you do? What?" Vance looked confused. "I told you she was resisting. She—" "Unlock those cuffs," Frank barked. It wasn't a request. It was a roar. Unlock them right now. Sarge, she's a suspect, That is Judge Haynes. Frank screamed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. That is a sitting judge. Get those cuffs off her now. The silence that followed Sergeant Frank Miller's scream was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Every other officer in the booking area, a corporal at the fingerprint scanner, a patrolman drinking coffee, a civilian clerk, froze. All eyes turned to the trio in the center of the room. Officer Tyler Vance looked as if he had been struck in the face with a shovel. His confident smirk dissolved into a mask of confusion and dawning horror. He looked at Sergeant Frank, whose face was purple with rage, and then he looked slowly at the woman he had just dragged across town in the back of his car. Evelyn hadn't moved. She stood with her chin raised, her eyes boring into Vance's soul. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that the air practically crackled. Vance stammered. His hands were shaking as he reached for his keyring. He fumbled with the keys, dropping them once. Pick them up, Evelyn said. It was the first time she had spoken since entering the station. Her voice was low-cold and commanded total obedience. Vance picked up the keys. It took him 3 tries to get the small metal key into the lock on her left wrist. Click. The ratchet released. He moved to the right wrist. Click. Evelyn brought her hands in front of her. She rubbed her wrists slowly. There were deep red indentations where the metal had dug in. The skin was abraded. Judge Haynes, Sergeant Frank said, stepping in front of Vance as if to shield the younger officer from the blast radius, or perhaps to shield the judge from the officer. Your Honor, I don't even have the words. I am so incredibly sorry. There is no excuse. Evelyn looked at Frank. She softened just a fraction. She knew Frank. He was a good officer, an old-school cop who respected the law. Sergeant Miller, Evelyn said, I would like to see the watch commander's log. I want the exact time of arrival documented, and I want this officer removed from my presence immediately. Vance, get in my office, Frank hissed, not looking back at him. Now, sit down. Don't touch anything. Don't speak to anyone. Vance walked toward the glass-walled office like a man walking to the gallows. He looked back once, and Evelyn met his gaze. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a promise of reckoning. Your Honor, please come sit down, Frank said, gesturing to a chair in the staff break area away from the holding cells. Can I get you water, coffee, ice for your wrists? I want photographs of my wrists first, Evelyn said. Before anything else, do you have a camera, Sergeant? Yes, ma'am. I'll take them myself. Frank retrieved the evidence camera. He took detailed photos of the bruising, the swelling. He treated it like a homicide crime scene. He knew that these photos would be Exhibit A in a lawsuit that was going to cost the city millions. Who is the chief on duty? Evelyn asked as Frank finished. Chief Reynolds is on the golf course, Your Honor. It's Tuesday. Get him off the golf course, Evelyn said. Tell him he needs to be here 20 minutes ago. While Frank made the frantic phone call, Evelyn sat in the hard plastic chair. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a dull ache in her shoulders and a throbbing headache. She closed her eyes. She thought about Bruno. She hoped Martha had gotten him home safely. She thought about her husband David, a retired surgeon who was probably losing his mind right now. Your Honor. Evelyn opened her eyes. Frank was holding a phone. Chief Reynolds is on the line. He wants to speak with you. Evelyn took the phone. This is Judge Haynes. Judge Evelyn, my God. The chief's voice came through breathless and panicked. Frank just told me. I am in the car. I'm doing 90 on the freeway. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Please tell me you're okay. I am not okay, Jim, Evelyn said, using his first name intentionally. I was kidnapped from my neighborhood. I was assaulted. I was profiled. And I'm currently sitting in your booking room with bruises on my wrists. I know. I am so sorry. We're going to fix this. We're going to make this right. Just please don't leave until I get there. I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn said. I have a statement to give. And Jim, you better bring the city attorney with you. She handed the phone back to Frank. Across the room, inside the glass office, Officer Vance was sitting with his head in his hands. He was beginning to realize that the suspicious person he had stopped was the most powerful person he had ever met. Evelyn reached into her pocket. Vance hadn't even patted her down properly, another violation, and pulled out her phone. She had missed calls from Martha and David. She texted David, I am at North Precinct. I am safe. Come get me. Bring my briefcase. She needed her briefcase. It contained her laptop, her notes, and her seal. If they wanted a judge, she would give them a judge. She wasn't just a victim now. She was the plaintiff, the prosecutor, and the jury all rolled into one. The door to the precinct flew open 15 minutes later. Chief Jim Reynolds, still wearing a polo shirt and golf slacks, burst in. He was sweating. He ignored his officers and went straight to Evelyn. Judge, he said, extending a hand, then pulling it back, unsure if he was allowed to touch her. I don't even know where to start. Start by preserving the evidence, Evelyn said, standing up. I want a preservation order issued immediately for Officer Vance's body camera footage, dash camera footage, GPS data, and radio logs. I want the dispatch recordings, and I want his personnel file pulled and placed on your desk. Done. Already done, Reynolds said. We're initiating an internal affairs investigation immediately. He's being placed on administrative leave as of right now. Administrative leave? Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Paid vacation for false arrest and assault on a federal magistrate. She wasn't federal, but she let the weight of her title hang there. It's protocol, Evelyn. You know the union contracts. But I promise you he is done. He will never wear a badge in this city again. He shouldn't wear a badge anywhere, Evelyn said. But that is a battle for tomorrow. Right now, I want to go home. I'll drive you, Reynolds offered. No, Evelyn said. My husband is outside. Through the glass doors, she saw David's car pulling up, followed closely by a news van. Evelyn sighed. Martha. Martha had called the press. Reynolds saw the van too and groaned. Oh, Christ. You have a press conference to prepare for, Chief, Evelyn said. I suggest you tell the truth. Because if you spin this, if you try to say I was uncooperative or that it was a misunderstanding, I will release the cell phone video my neighbor took, and I will burn this department to the ground legally. Reynolds nodded, looking defeated. We'll tell the truth. Evelyn walked out of the station. The sun was blinding after the dim light of the holding area. David ran to her, wrapping her in a hug. She winced as he touched her shoulders. Did they hurt you? David asked, his voice shaking with rage. I'm okay, Evelyn said. She looked at the reporter setting up a camera on the sidewalk. She straightened her tracksuit jacket. She smoothed her hair. She lifted her chin. Let's go home, David. I have a lawsuit to draft. The lawsuit filed 3 days later in the United States District Court was a masterclass in civil rights litigation. It was titled Haynes vs. City of Metro et al., but the media quickly dubbed it the judge's judgment. The filing didn't just allege a bad arrest. It dissected the systemic failure of the police department. It cited the lack of reasonable suspicion, the excessive force, the unlawful seizure, and the racial profiling that motivated the stop. But what truly ignited the firestorm was the release of the video footage. Evelyn's legal team, led by a shark of a civil rights attorney named Marcus Thorne, released the synchronized video. On the left side of the screen was Martha's cell phone footage, shaky but clear, showing a calm woman being manhandled. On the right side was Officer Vance's body camera. The public saw Vance's aggressive approach. They heard his sneering tone. They heard Evelyn's calm, articulate invocation of the law. They watched as he twisted the arms of a 54-year-old woman and shoved her into a car because she dared to know her rights. The internet exploded. The video had 10 million views in 48 hours. Comment sections were filled with outrage. If they do this to a judge, what are they doing to our kids? He didn't even know the law he was trying to enforce. Fire him. Charge him. The city attorney, a pragmatic woman named Sarah Jenkins, watched the video in her office with her head in her hands. She called the mayor. "We have to settle," Jenkins said. "We cannot go to trial. If we put Evelyn Haynes on the stand with that video, the jury will give her the entire city budget. She's not just a sympathetic victim. She's an expert witness in her own case." "How bad is it?" the mayor asked. "It's indefensible, and it gets worse. We pulled Vance's data." The investigation into Officer Tyler Vance had opened a Pandora's box. The internal affairs team, under pressure from the chief and the public, dug deep. They found that in his 18 months, Vance had made 42 stops in Evelyn's neighborhood. 38 of them were Black or Hispanic people. Most were delivery drivers, contractors, or residents. He had a pattern. He hunted in that zip code. He used suspicious person as a catch-all for person of color in a rich neighborhood. Furthermore, they found body cam footage from 2 months prior where Vance had referred to the neighborhood as the jungle while talking to another officer joking about cleaning up the trash. When this information leaked, as it inevitably does, the protests started. People gathered outside the police station. They marched through Oak Creek Estates. Evelyn watched it all from her living room. She was on medical leave from the bench, her shoulder requiring physical therapy. Bruno sat at her feet. She wasn't happy about the protests. She wasn't happy about the chaos. She believed in the law. She believed in order. But she knew that sometimes order had to be disrupted to be restored. She received a letter from Vance. It was handwritten, delivered through his union rep. It was a desperate, rambling apology, blaming his training, his stress, his fear. Evelyn read it once, then fed it into the shredder. Apologies without change were just noise. The police union, usually staunch defenders of their own abandoned Vance. The video was too damning. The victim was too powerful. They issued a statement saying Vance's actions did not reflect the values of the membership. It was the death knell for his career. 6 weeks after the incident, the disciplinary tribunal met. Vance was terminated for cause. He was stripped of his certification, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. But Evelyn wasn't done. She pushed for the settlement, not for the money, but for the terms. The settlement negotiations took place in a high-rise conference room overlooking the city. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, flanked by her attorney. Across from her were the city attorney, the police chief, and the mayor. "The city is prepared to offer $1 million, the city attorney said, "with no admission of liability." Evelyn adjusted her glasses. "I don't care about the admission of liability. The video is the admission, and I don't just want money." "What do you want, Judge?" the mayor asked. "I want policy," Evelyn said. "I want a mandatory requirement that officers must articulate the specific crime suspected on their body camera before they initiate a Terry stop. If they can't say it to the camera, they can't stop the citizen." That's a significant operational change," the chief said. "It's the law," Evelyn countered. "I'm just asking you to enforce it. I also want an independent civilian review board for all bias complaints, and I want Officer Vance's termination to be public and permanent with a report sent to the National Decertification Index so he doesn't just go 2 counties over and do this to someone else." The room was quiet. The demands were steep, but the alternative was a public trial where Judge Evelyn Haynes would dissect the department on national television. "Agreed," the mayor said. "And the money?" Evelyn asked. $1.5 million, the city attorney offered, trying to close it. $2 million, Evelyn said. "And I want it paid within 30 days. And they settled for $1.8 million. Evelyn didn't keep a dime. She established the Bruno Fund, named after the dog that Vance had wanted to send to the pound. The fund provided legal representation for indigent defendants who had been victims of police misconduct. It paid for expert witnesses, private investigators, and civil rights attorneys for people who didn't have a law degree or a judicial title. The day the settlement was signed, Evelyn returned to work. Walking into the courthouse was different now. The deputies at the security checkpoint stood a little straighter. They greeted her with a reverence that was tinged with fear. They knew what she had done. They knew she was not to be trifled with. She entered her chambers and put on her robe. The black silk felt heavy but comforting. It was her armor. She walked into her courtroom. The bailiff cried out, "All rise!" Everyone stood, the lawyers, the litigants, the clerks. Evelyn climbed the steps to the bench. She looked out at the room. She saw the faces of the people waiting for justice. She saw a young black man in the back row looking nervous. She thought about Officer Vance. She thought about how close she had come to being just another statistic. If she hadn't been a judge, if she hadn't known the case law, if Martha hadn't filmed, she would have been charged with resisting arrest. She would have had a criminal record. She would have lost her job. She sat down. "Be seated." The room settled. Evelyn looked at the first file. It was a custody case. A father fighting to see his children. "Call the first case," Evelyn said. Her voice was strong. It was the voice of authority. But underneath it, there was a new layer of empathy. She knew now in a visceral way what it felt like to be powerless. She knew what it felt like to have the state's boot on your neck. That evening, Evelyn walked Bruno again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across Oak Creek Estates. A patrol car drove by a different officer. He slowed down. He waved respectfully. Evelyn nodded back. She wasn't safe because the system had changed overnight. She was safe because she had forced the system to see her. But as she walked, she looked at the houses, the quiet streets, and she knew the work wasn't done. She stopped at the corner where it had happened. She looked at the pavement. There was no mark, no sign of the violence, but she remembered. "Come on, Bruno," she whispered. "Let's go home." Note: I combined the narrative arc so the story flowed naturally into the conclusion in Part 6, but to fulfill the 8-part structure requested, I will expand on the deeper investigation and the aftermath details that were glossed over, effectively splitting the density of the previous events. Retconning slightly to expand the investigation phase which would fit between the filing and the settlement. Let's step back to the weeks before the settlement. The investigation into the police department had revealed rot that went deeper than Vance. The Department of Justice, DOJ, had taken notice of the lawsuit. While Evelyn recovered at home, federal investigators arrived in Metro City. They weren't just interested in Vance. They were interested in the supervisors who had enabled him. They interviewed Sergeant Frank Miller. Frank, honest to a fault, admitted that Vance's aggressive numbers had been praised by upper management before the incident. Stats over strategy, Frank had called it. The DOJ report released 2 weeks before the settlement was scathing. It detailed a culture of impunity, where officers were encouraged to make pretextual stops in affluent neighborhoods to keep the riffraff out. The report vindicated Evelyn completely, but it also brought her a sense of profound sadness. She sat in her study reading the 200-page document. She read the stories of other citizens, a teacher, a dentist, a college student who had been stopped by Vance and his squad. They hadn't been judges. They had been intimidated into consenting to searches. They had been ticketed for non-existent infractions. Evelyn realized her lawsuit had to be about them. That was when she decided to add the stipulation about the Civilian Review Board. She met with community leaders in her living room, pastors, activists, mothers who had lost sons. "You have the power," one activist told her. "You have the voice they can't ignore." Evelyn looked at her hands, the wrists still faintly discolored. "I never asked for this," she said. "I just wanted to walk my dog." "But you were chosen," the pastor said, "because you could fight back." This period of reflection was crucial. It transformed Evelyn from a plaintiff into a crusader. It was why she was so hardline in the settlement meeting. She wasn't negotiating for herself. She was negotiating for the ghosts in the DOJ report. Conclusion and reflection. 6 months later. The Oak Creek Estates were quiet. The leaves were turning gold and red with the arrival of autumn. Evelyn walked Bruno, his gait a little slower, now his muzzle a little grayer. The settlement had been paid. The reforms were being implemented, albeit slowly. The Vance rule, the requirement for articulating suspicion on camera, was now standard operating procedure. Body cam activations had gone up 40%. Citizen complaints had dropped 15%. Officer Tyler Vance was working at a car dealership 3 towns over. He had tried to sue the department for wrongful termination, but no lawyer would take his case. The video was forever. He was a pariah. Evelyn stopped at Martha's house. Martha was on the porch knitting. "Morning, Judge." Martha smiled. "Morning, Martha," Evelyn replied. "Beautiful day." "It is." They didn't talk about the arrest much anymore. They didn't have to. The bond between them was unspoken but unbreakable. Martha had stood up when it mattered. That was enough. Evelyn continued her walk. She reached the end of the block and looked back. She thought about the fragile nature of justice. It wasn't a stone monument. It was a garden. It had to be tended, watered, and weeded constantly. If you looked away, the weeds of bias and power would take over. She had weeded her corner of the garden. As she turned back toward her house, a young police officer on a bicycle patrol rode by. He was black. He smiled at her. "Good morning, Judge Haynes." "Good morning, officer," she said. He rode on. Evelyn watched him go. A small hope bloomed in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, things were getting better. She unclipped Bruno's leash as they reached her driveway. The dog trotted to the front door, tail wagging. Evelyn took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. She was a judge. She was a black woman. She was a survivor. And she was free. This story reminds us that titles and robes do not shield anyone from bias, but the courage to stand up can change the world for everyone else. Evelyn Haynes fought not because she was a judge, but because she was a citizen who knew her worth. What would you have done in Evelyn's shoes? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have shown your badge immediately? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in holding power accountable, please like this story and share it. It helps us bring more truth to light. Thank you for reading.
Sir, I'm legally parked on a public street. Am I being detained or is this consensual?
I don't need a law lecture. You're loitering. Get out or I'll pull you out.
You have no reasonable suspicion. This stop violates the Fourth Amendment.
Turn around. Hands on the car. Now.
For the record, this is unlawful, and your camera is watching.
Officer Kyle Vinson had been patrolling the streets of Chicago for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his life and drain the city's coffers of $4.5 million. He was 28 years old, a man who wore his badge not as a shield to protect, but as a hammer to intimidate. On a crisp Thursday morning in the affluent suburb of Oak Ridge, Vinson received a dispatch call that should have been routine. Instead, his response to it would become a case study in every police academy in the state, not as an example to follow, but as a warning of what happens when arrogance meets absolute authority. But Vinson didn't know any of that yet. He only knew that he was right, and that his judgment was never to be questioned. Before we dive into the details of this catastrophic failure of policing, I want to know, where are you tuning in from today? Let us know in the comments, and if you believe in holding power accountable, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring these stories out of the shadows. Officer Vinson's personnel file was a minefield of red flags that the department had conveniently chosen to ignore. In 6 years, he had accrued 14 complaints. Most were for discourtesy or unprofessional conduct, euphemisms often used when an officer is aggressive but manages to stay just inside the lines of the law. He was known in his precinct as a proactive officer, the kind who went looking for trouble rather than waiting for it to be reported. His supervisors praised his high ticket numbers and his arrest stats, turning a blind eye to the community trust he was eroding with every shift. He had a reputation for stopping luxury vehicles driven by minority men claiming they fit the description of stolen cars only to release them after 45 minutes of humiliation on the side of the road. To Vincent, the law was a tool he owned, not a standard he served. The morning of the incident. October 14th was bright and clear. Vincent was patrolling Oak Ridge, a neighborhood of sprawling lawns, three-car garages, and quiet streets lined with oak trees that were just beginning to turn gold. It was a place where people moved to escape the noise of the city, a place where the residents paid high taxes and expected concierge policing. Vincent liked working this beat. It made him feel powerful. He felt like the gatekeeper of a fortress. At 10:10 a.m., his radio crackled to life. Unit 4 Alpha, we have a call from a resident on Elmwood Drive. Suspicious vehicle. Black male driver sitting in a parked sedan for approximately 20 minutes. Caller states he appears to be casing the neighborhood. Vincent grabbed the radio mic, a smirk touching his lips. 4 Alpha, show me en route. In his mind, the narrative was already written. A black man in a parked car in Oak Ridge, probably a drug deal waiting to happen, maybe a porch pirate scouting for Amazon packages, or perhaps a burglar waiting for homeowners to leave for work. It didn't cross his mind that it could be a resident, a guest, or a contractor. The bias that had festered in his subconscious for years immediately filled in the blanks. He hit the accelerator, his cruiser surging forward. He wasn't going to investigate. He was going to dominate. He turned onto Elmwood Drive at 10:15 a.m., his eyes scanning the street until they landed on a sleek, charcoal-gray luxury sedan parked legally against the curb. Inside sat a man looking down at some papers. Vincent didn't see a citizen. He saw a target. The man sitting in the charcoal sedan was Dr. Marcus Thorne. At 58 years old, Thorne was a figure of immense stature in the law enforcement community, though Kyle Vincent had no idea who he was. Thorne had spent 30 years with the state police, rising through the ranks from a beat cop in the toughest districts to deputy chief of the entire force. After retiring from active duty, he hadn't slowed down. He had earned his doctorate in criminal justice and was currently serving as the director of ethics and standards at the State Police Academy. He was literally the man who wrote the book on constitutional policing. The training manuals in the trunk of Vincent's cruiser Thorne had edited the last 3 editions. The protocols for Terry stops and reasonable suspicion Thorne had testified before the state Senate to get them codified into law. Thorne was sitting in his car because he was early. He was looking to downsize now that his children were grown, and he had a 10:30 a.m. appointment with a real estate agent to view the colonial-style house across the street. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie, his standard attire for a business day. He was reviewing the property disclosures and checking his emails on his tablet. He had the window cracked open to let in the fresh autumn air, enjoying the quiet of the neighborhood. He had noticed the curtain twitching in the house 2 doors down, the home of Mrs. Brenda Higgins, but he had dismissed it. He was used to being watched. In a 30-year career, he had learned that a black man in a suit was often viewed with more suspicion than a white man in a hoodie. He saw the patrol car turn the corner. He watched in his rearview mirror as the cruiser accelerated unnecessarily, the engine roaring briefly before the officer slammed on the brakes, pulling up behind Thorne's sedan at an aggressive angle. It was a tactical park designed to block escape and intimidate the occupant. Thorne sighed, folding his hands on the steering wheel, a habit ingrained from decades of training and survival. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He checked the time, 10:17 a.m. He mentally prepared himself. He wasn't worried about being arrested. He knew the law better than the man walking toward him, but he was disappointed. He had hoped the department had moved past this. Thorne watched the officer exit the vehicle. He noted the tactical sunglasses, the lack of a hat, the hand resting dangerously close to the grip of his service weapon. He noted the officer's body language, shoulders squared, chest puffed out, walking a straight line of aggression. There was no caution, only confrontation. Thorne knew the procedure. The officer should approach with caution, but courtesy, identify himself, and state the reason for the inquiry. He watched as Officer Vinson stopped at the B-pillar of the sedan, preventing Thorne from opening the door, and leaned down. Thorne lowered the window the rest of the way, turning to face the young officer. He saw the nameplate K. Vinson. He filed it away in his memory. "Good morning, officer," Thorne said, his voice a deep, calm baritone that had commanded briefing rooms for decades. "How can I help you?" The call that summoned Vinson had come from Brenda Higgins, a 62-year-old retiree who spent her days monitoring the neighborhood app and watching the street from her living room window. Brenda was the self-appointed guardian of Elmwood Drive. She believed that safety meant sameness, and anything that deviated from her expected pattern was a threat. When she saw Thorne pull up and park, she didn't see a potential neighbor. She saw an anomaly. She watched him for 10 minutes. He didn't get out. He was just sitting there, reading. To Brenda, reading in a car wasn't a valid activity for a stranger in her neighborhood. It was loitering. It was casing. She had dialed the non-emergency line first, then hung up and dialed 911 to ensure a faster response. "There's a man sitting in a car outside my house," she told the dispatcher, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "He's been there for an hour. He's watching the houses. I think he has a weapon. He keeps reaching under the seat." That last part was a fabrication, a detail added to juice the priority of the call. She knew that mentioning a weapon would bring the police faster. "He doesn't belong here," she added. "He looks dangerous." The dispatcher had asked for a description. "He's black, driving a dark car. Please hurry, I'm scared to go to my mailbox." When Vinson arrived, he was operating on Brenda's heightened narrative. He didn't see a man waiting for a realtor. He saw the dangerous subject with a possible weapon. This is the fatal flaw in reliance on biased 911. Calls the officer borrows the fear and prejudice of the caller. Vinson approached the car with his adrenaline spiking. He ignored the calm demeanor of the driver. He ignored the expensive suit. He ignored the professional greeting. "Driver's license, now," Vinson barked, skipping the introduction, skipping the explanation. He stood with his feet apart, asserting dominance. Thorne didn't move his hands from the wheel. He looked at Vinson with a gaze that was steady and analytical. "Officer Vinson," Thorne said, reading the nameplate again. "I'm happy to cooperate, but I'd like to know the reason for this interaction. Am I being detained, or is this a consensual conversation?" Vinson's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to questions. He was used to fear. "I said give me your ID. We have reports of suspicious activity in this area. You're loitering. Now hand it over, or I'm pulling you out of the car." "Loitering requires intent to commit a crime or lingering in a place where one has no business," Thorne said, his voice remaining level, almost like a professor lecturing a student. "I am parked on a public street waiting for a real estate appointment at 10:30. That is not loitering. As for my ID under state law, unless you can articulate a reasonable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime, I am not required to identify myself." Vinson felt a flush of heat rise up his neck. It was the anger of a man whose authority was being checked by someone he viewed as inferior. "You want to play lawyer?" Vinson sneered. "Get out of the car, now." The command hung in the air, heavy with implication. "Get out of the car." It was a lawful order only if the stop itself was lawful, and Thorne knew that Vinson was skating on thin ice. Pennsylvania v. Mims allowed officers to order drivers out of vehicles for safety, but the initial stop still had to be valid. Thorne made a calculation. He could refuse lock the door and wait for a supervisor, which might lead to his window being smashed and a taser being deployed. Or he could comply, allow the violation to happen, and secure the evidence needed to ensure this officer never did this to anyone else again. Thorne chose the long game. "I will step out of the vehicle," Thorne said, narrating his actions for the body camera he knew was recording. "I am complying with your order, Officer Vinson. though I am stating for the record that I believe this stop is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure." Thorne slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He opened the door with his left hand, keeping his right hand visible. He stepped out, standing to his full height of 6'2". He towered slightly over Vinson. The officer stepped back, his hand now gripping the handle of his gun. "Turn around. Hands on the roof," Vinson commanded. "Is this a Terry stop, officer?" Thorne asked, placing his hands on the roof of his own Audi. "Do you have specific and articulable facts that I am armed and dangerous?" Vinson didn't answer. He stepped forward and kicked Thorne's feet apart. "Spread 'em." He began a pat-down, his hands rough and invasive. He patted down Thorne's suit jacket, feeling the wallet, the phone, the pen. "I found a wallet," Vinson said, reaching into the inside pocket. "I didn't give consent for a search," Thorne said sharply. "A pat-down is for weapons only. Reaching into my pocket to retrieve ID during a detention without arrest is a gray area you don't want to be an officer." Vinson ignored him. He yanked the wallet out and flipped it open. He looked at the driver's license. Marcus Thorne. The name didn't ring a bell. He missed the other card behind it, the retired credentials, the gold shield that said Deputy Chief. He was too focused on the victory of getting the ID. "Marcus," Vinson said deliberately, using the first name to demean him. "See, was that so hard? Now let's run you and see what warrants pop up." "You are holding me without cause," Thorne said. "I have identified myself. I have explained my presence. You have found no weapons. You are now prolonging this stop beyond the time reasonably required to address the initial suspicion. Rodriguez versus United States. You are clocking up civil liability by the second." Vinson laughed a short, sharp bark. "You know a lot of court cases for a guy sitting in a car. That tells me you've been in the system before. Jailhouse lawyer, huh?" Vinson walked back to his cruiser, keeping Thorne standing by the car. "Stay right there. Don't move." By now, the neighborhood was waking up to the scene. The real estate agent, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, pulled up in her white SUV across the street. She saw her client, Dr. Thorne, a man she knew was a distinguished former police executive, standing with his hands on his car being detained by a patrol officer. She gasped, putting her car in park and grabbing her phone. She didn't call 911. She started recording. 2 houses down, a young man who followed local politics recognized Thorne instantly. He stepped out onto his porch, phone raised. "Hey!" the neighbor shouted. "That's Dr. Thorne! What are you doing?" Vinson ignored the bystanders. He sat in his cruiser, typing the name into the terminal. He waited for the hit. He waited for the warrant for unpaid child support, or the suspended license, or the prior felony. The screen refreshed. No warrants. License valid. Vehicle registered to Marcus Thorne. Then the employment history field populated from the state database. Previous employment: state police. Deputy Chief retired. Current status: active instructor, State Academy. Vinson blinked. He read it again. His stomach gave a strange lurch, a mix of confusion and denial. It couldn't be right. This guy, the loiterer. But instead of stepping back, Vinson doubled down. This is a psychological phenomenon often seen in misconduct cases: escalation of commitment. When faced with evidence that they are wrong, the biased mind searches for a reason to be right. He's a retired chief. Then he should know better than to give me attitude, Vinson thought. He's testing me. He thinks he's above the law because he used to be a cop. The ego took over. Vinson got out of the car, storming back toward Thorne. He didn't apologize. He didn't release him. "So you used to be on the job," Vinson said, his voice aggressive. "That's why you think you can disrespect a patrol officer. You know the drill. When I ask for ID, you give it." "I know the law, Officer Vinson," Thorne said, turning his head slightly. "And I know that you have currently detained a citizen for 18 minutes without probable cause. You have searched me illegally, and now you are engaging in a retaliatory detention because your ego is bruised. Vincent snapped. He grabbed Thorne's wrist. "That's it. You're under arrest." Thorne didn't resist. He didn't pull away. He let Vincent twist his arm behind his back. "On what charge?" Thorne asked calmly. "Disorderly conduct, resisting without violence, and failure to obey a lawful order." Vincent pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked around Thorne's wrists. The bystanders were shouting now. "He's a deputy chief," the neighbor yelled. "You idiot, look at who you're arresting." Vincent shoved Thorne against the side of the Audi, tightening the cuffs unnecessarily. "I don't care who you think you are," Vincent hissed in Thorne's ear. "On my street, you listen to me." Vincent reached for his radio to call for transport. He pressed the orange emergency button on his radio, a signal that an officer is in distress or has a non-compliant suspect. It was a move designed to bring backup fast to show force. "Unit 4 Alpha 1 in custody, requesting transport. Subject is uncooperative." Minutes later, a siren wailed in the distance. A supervisor's SUV tore around the corner, followed by another patrol car. Sergeant David Miller was the field supervisor on duty. He was a 15-year veteran, a man who took his job seriously. He had heard Vincent's voice on the radio, stressed, angry, aggressive. Miller had been worried about Vincent for months. He pulled up to the scene expecting a brawl. What he saw was a man in a suit, handcuffed, standing calmly while Vincent held his arm. Miller got out of his SUV, adjusting his belt. He walked quickly toward them. "Vincent, what do we have?" Miller asked, his eyes scanning the suspect. Then he stopped. He froze mid-step. He looked at the man in handcuffs. He looked at the face he had seen in textbooks, the face of the man who had shaken his hand at his own graduation from the academy 12 years ago. The face of the man whose signature was on the certificate hanging in Miller's office. Miller's blood ran cold. He felt a wave of nausea. "Oh my God," Miller whispered. He looked at Vincent, who was still puffing his chest out. "Sarge, this guy refused ID, was loitering, gave me attitude. I got him on disorderly and resisting." Miller looked back at Thorne. Thorne looked at Miller, his expression one of profound disappointment. "Hello, Sergeant Miller," Thorne said. "I believe we met at the leadership seminar in Springfield last year." Miller scrambled forward, pushing Vincent's hand away from Thorne's arm. "Officer Vincent, step back." Miller barked, his voice cracking with panic. "Step back right now." "Sarge, what's the problem?" Vincent asked, confused by the sudden hostility from his boss. "Do you know who this is?" Miller screamed, pulling the key from his belt. He fumbled with the handcuffs, his hands shaking. "This is Deputy Chief Marcus Thorne. He runs the ethics division. You just arrested the man who writes the use of force policy." Vincent stood there, the color draining from his face. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. The handcuffs clicked open. Miller carefully removed them. "Chief, I am so sorry. I have no words. Are you injured?" Thorne rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had bit into the skin. He adjusted his suit jacket, straightening his tie. He looked at Vincent, who was now trembling, looking like a child who had broken a priceless vase. Thorne didn't yell. He didn't curse. He spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who knows he holds all the cards. "Sergeant Miller," Thorne said, "secure Officer Vincent's weapon and badge. Place him in the back of your vehicle. I want a full inquiry initiated immediately. I want the body camera footage pulled and preserved before anyone touches a server. And I want the captain here, now." Vincent tried to speak. I didn't know." Thorne cut him off with a look. "It shouldn't matter who I am, Officer Vincent. That is the point. If I were a plumber or a teacher or unemployed, I still have rights. You violated them. You violated your oath. And you did it with an arrogance that tells me this isn't the first time." Miller turned to Vincent. "Give me your badge, now." Vincent slowly unpinned the shield from his chest. His hands were shaking so hard he dropped it. It clattered on the asphalt, a sound that signaled the end of his career. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The investigation didn't take months. It took days. The body camera footage was damning. It showed a polite, compliant citizen and a belligerent, power-hungry officer. The department tried to keep it quiet, but Thorne refused a quiet settlement. He sued. He sued not for the money, but to force the evidence into the public domain. The city settled for $4.5 million to avoid a jury trial that would have been a public relations massacre. Kyle Vinson was fired 3 weeks later. The review board, headed by independent auditors, cited gross incompetence, civil rights violations, and conduct unbecoming. But Thorne went further. He petitioned the State Peace Officer Standards and Training Board to decertify Vinson. He testified at the hearing himself. Vinson lost his certification. He would never be a police officer again. He was 28 with no other skills branded permanently as the officer who profiled the wrong man. The last reports heard of him, he was working in a warehouse in a different state loading trucks. The Oak Ridge incident changed policy. The Thorne rule was implemented requiring supervisors to be present before any arrest for disorderly conduct or resisting could be finalized, preventing officers from using those charges as cover for contempt of cop. Dr. Thorne donated a significant portion of the settlement to a legal defense fund for victims of racial profiling who didn't have his rank or resources. He eventually bought the house on Elmwood Drive. Every day when he drives his car down that street, he waves to Mrs. Higgins. She never waves back. She stays behind her curtains. But the message was delivered. We have to ask ourselves if this can happen to a deputy chief, a man who knows the law better than the officers enforcing it. What happens to the teenager who doesn't know his rights? What happens to the construction worker who just wants to get home? Justice shouldn't depend on who you are. It should be the standard for everyone. Dr. Thorne proved that a badge is a heavy thing to carry. If you aren't strong enough to carry it with integrity, you shouldn't carry it at all. Kyle Vinson learned that lesson too late. Don't let his mistake be yours. What do you think? Should officers be personally liable for civil rights lawsuits paying out of their own pensions instead of the taxpayers footing the bill? And how do we fix a system where neighbors feel comfortable calling the police on people just for existing? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story powerful, please like and share it. It helps us keep the truth in the spotlight. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.